Clarity is not the absence of darkness. It is the capacity to see truly at the very heart of confusion, not by simplifying the world until it becomes transparent, but by developing a quality of seeing that discerns what is essential even amid apparent disorder. A mountain lake does not refuse the clouds passing through the sky. It reflects them, and yet its water remains clear. True clarity works this way. It welcomes everything without becoming troubled. This clarity belongs to no one in particular. It waits within each of us like clear water waiting beneath stirred-up sediment. It is not built through the accumulation of knowledge or through analysis pushed to extremes. It simply reveals itself when agitation ceases, when we create the silent space for its manifestation. The ancient masters compared this clarity to the moon reflected in still water. The moon makes no effort to appear in the pond, and the pond makes no effort to receive it. When conditions are right, the reflection appears naturally, perfect and luminous. We live in a particularly foggy world. Information contradicts itself. Choices multiply without criteria becoming clearer. Relationships grow complicated in a world of constant change. Each day brings its share of news that seems to cancel yesterday's. Advice that contradicts what we had received before, demands that pull our attention in opposite directions. Faced with this modern confusion, two temptations await us: taking refuge in artificial certainties that reassure us but blind us, or resigning ourselves to a permanent fog that paralyzes and exhausts us. Yet there exists a third way, the one explored by Taoist sages and Zen masters for millennia. The clarity that arises from mental emptiness, the simplicity that reveals the essential, the pure attention that sees things as they are, rather than as we would wish them to be. This path requires a particular kind of learning, not acquiring something new, but patiently unlearning what obscures our natural vision. For we are all born with this capacity to see clearly, like the newborn who gazes at the world with fresh eyes, without the filters that experience and fear will gradually deposit upon their sight. An old man stood at the edge of a muddy pond, agitated by wind and troubled by the comings and goings of animals who had come to drink. A young seeker approached and asked how one could see the bottom of such opaque water. The old man smiled gently and simply told him to sit down and wait. They remained in silence for an hour. Gradually, the agitation ceased. The mud settled, the water returned to stillness, and suddenly the bottom of the pond appeared with perfect clarity. The sage then murmured that clarity had never been absent. It was simply masked by agitation, and that our mind works exactly the same way. The water already knew how to be clear. It did not need to learn transparency, only to stop being troubled. Our confusion rarely comes from the complexity of the outer world. It most often arises from our inner agitation, which projects its turbulence onto reality. We look at the world through water that we ourselves are stirring, then complain that we cannot see anything distinctly. This agitation takes several forms that we all know intimately, even if we are not always aware of them. First, there is the incessant chatter of the mind that comments, judges, compares, anticipates, and regrets without ever resting, like a market at dawn where all the vendors shout at once. This inner commentator has an opinion on everything, an interpretation for every event, a worry for every possibility. It never truly falls silent. Even at night in our dreams, it continues its monologue. In this inner noise, the subtle messages of the present situation are lost like a delicate melody that cannot be heard when the radio blares at full volume. We miss the nuances, the quiet signs, the tranquil evidence that would guide us if only we could perceive it. Then there are the emotions that remain in shadow and color our perception without our knowing. Fear makes us see danger everywhere, transforming every uncertainty into threat, every novelty into potential risk. Anger makes us perceive attacks where there may have been only clumsiness or indifference. Sadness tints everything with shades of loss, making us anticipate separations in every encounter, endings in every beginning. These emotions are not bad in themselves. They are even precious messengers when we know how to listen to them. But when they remain unconscious, they act like tinted glasses we have forgotten on our nose, distorting everything we look at without our realizing that the distortion comes from us and not from the world. And then there are our desires and attachments that make us see what we want to see rather than what is actually there. We project our hopes onto situations, interpret signs according to our wishes, force reality to match our expectations, and thus miss the information that contradicts our preferences. How many times have we ignored obvious warnings because they did not match what we wanted to believe? How many times have we seen promises where there was only our own desire reflected back? A Zen master was one day watching his disciples debating passionately whether a flag fluttering in the wind was moving or remaining still. Some argued that the flag was moving since one could see it rippling. Others maintained that it was the wind that was moving and the flag was merely responding to its motion. The debate grew heated, each defending their position with conviction. The master gently interrupted them, saying that neither the flag nor the wind was moving. It was their minds that were moving. The silence that followed was more eloquent than all their discussions. This intervention reveals that our confusions often arise from our inability to distinguish between what is actually happening and what is happening in our interpretation of what is happening. Most of the time, we do not see situations directly, but through the filter of our concepts, our mental categories, our past experiences, our future projections. This constant mediation creates a distance that distorts our perception and generates unnecessary complications. We are not really debating the flag or the wind. We are debating our ideas about the flag and the wind, which is very different. The Taoist tradition teaches that to recover natural clarity, we must first recognize this tendency we have to complicate what is simple. Lao Tzu said that the way of the sage is to act without struggling, and this non-struggle applies first to our way of perceiving. Seeing without forcing, understanding without constraining, letting truth reveal itself rather than extorting it through analysis. This approach may seem passive at first glance, but it actually requires a very refined quality of attention, a very alive presence that knows how to welcome without grasping. This approach requires a particular quality of attention that contemplative traditions call the mirror mind. Like a perfect mirror that reflects everything presented before it, without distortion, without judgment, and without preference, this state of pure consciousness can welcome reality as it is, in its simultaneous complexity and simplicity. The mirror does not choose what it reflects. It does not prefer beautiful images to ugly ones. It does not retain pleasant reflections while rejecting others. It welcomes everything with the same equanimity. And it is precisely this equanimity that allows it to reflect with accuracy. Cultivating this mirror mind begins with learning to calm the mental agitation that troubles our vision. This pacification does not happen through the forced suppression of thoughts, which would only add agitation to agitation, but through a subtler process of disidentification and release. Wanting to stop one's thoughts by force is like wanting to calm the waves of the ocean by striking them with a stick. Each blow creates new waves, and the agitation only grows. The first step consists in developing what Zen masters call the silent observer, the capacity to step back from the flow of our thoughts and watch them as passing phenomena rather than as absolute truths. This position of observation creates a space of freedom where we are no longer automatically carried away by every thought that arises. We can see a thought appear, recognize it for what it is, a thought among others, and let it pass without clinging to it or pushing it away. This detached observation quickly reveals a liberating truth. Our thoughts are not us. They arise and disappear in the space of our consciousness like clouds in the sky. We are no more our thoughts than the sky is the clouds that cross it. This realization, simple in appearance, profoundly transforms our relationship to our mental life. We stop identifying with every thought, every emotion, every passing mood. We discover within ourselves a vaster, more stable space that can contain all these movements without being swept away by them. A Taoist hermit was one day explaining to a visitor to look at the clouds passing up there. They do not ask the sky's permission to appear or disappear, he said, and the sky welcomes them all with the same serenity, the dark ones as well as the luminous, the fast as well as the slow. It does not try to hold on to the beautiful white clouds or chase away the storm clouds. It simply remains what it is, vast and open, and the clouds pass. Become like this sky for your thoughts, spacious and welcoming, but never swept away by any of them. This metaphor of the sky reveals the nature of true clarity. It is not the absence of mental phenomena, but the presence of a conscious space vast enough to contain them all without being troubled by any. This inner spaciousness allows situations to reveal themselves in their true nature without being distorted by our automatic reactions. When we offer this space to the events of our life, they can show themselves as they are, without the veil of our fears and desires. This spaciousness is acquired through the patient practice of what the Taoists call mental wu-wei, the art of not intervening in the natural flow of thoughts and emotions. Instead of fighting against difficult states of mind or clinging to pleasant ones, we learn to maintain a stable presence that allows all inner phenomena to unfold and resolve naturally. This approach trusts the intrinsic wisdom of the mind, which knows how to find its balance when we stop disturbing it. An old story tells of a farmer who owned a horse that one day ran away into the hills. His neighbors came to console him on his misfortune. The farmer simply replied, "Who knows if it is misfortune?" The next day the horse returned with 3 wild horses. The neighbors came to congratulate him on his good fortune. The farmer replied, "Who knows if it is good fortune?" The following day, his son tried to ride one of the wild horses, was thrown, and broke his leg. The neighbors returned with their condolences. The farmer replied again, "Who knows?" A week later, the army passed through the village to conscript all able-bodied young men. The farmer's son, with his broken leg, was spared. This story teaches us the wisdom of not judging too quickly, of not labeling events as good or bad before time has revealed their true nature. This suspension of judgment is itself a form of clarity. Non-intervention requires a particular form of courage, that of remaining present with discomfort without immediately seeking to resolve it or escape from it. Much of our confusion arises precisely from this tendency to avoid unpleasant sensations, which makes us flee into activities, thoughts or emotions that take us even further from clarity. We are afraid of emptiness, afraid of silence, afraid of what might emerge if we stopped agitating. Yet it is precisely in this emptiness and silence that clarity can manifest. Conscious breathing offers a precious anchor for developing this capacity for non-reactive presence. By regularly returning to the simple observation of the breath coming in and going out, we create a refuge of simplicity at the heart of mental complexity. The breath is always there, always available, always present. It asks for nothing, judges nothing, simply continues its natural movement of inhalation and exhalation. By resting on this movement, we find a point of stability amid inner storms. A meditation master advised his students that when the mind becomes agitated, like a crazy monkey leaping from branch to branch, one should not chase it in its acrobatics, but return to the breath as to a solid tree, and let the monkey exhaust itself with its antics. Sooner or later, it will come to rest. This image reveals a fundamental strategy for recovering clarity. Instead of fighting against agitation, we simply learn not to feed it with our attention. This indirect approach often proves more effective than direct confrontation, which generally only fuels what it claims to combat. This wisdom of non-feeding applies particularly to ruminations and preoccupations that obscure our vision. When we find ourselves caught in loops of anxious thoughts or in endless analysis that go round in circles, returning to the simplicity of the present moment can break the cycle and restore a clearer perspective. Feeling our feet on the ground, listening to the sounds around us, breathing consciously, observing the colors and shapes around us. These simple gestures bring us back to what is here, now, and dispel the mists of what exists only in our imagination. It is remarkable to notice how many of our worries concern situations that will never occur. How many of our regrets bear on a past we can no longer change. How much of our energy is spent fighting phantoms. The present, for its part, is often much simpler and much more manageable than the catastrophic scenarios our mind elaborates. By returning to the present, we frequently discover that we have the resources to face what is actually there, even if we felt overwhelmed by everything our imagination had added to it. This practice gradually reveals that clarity is not an extraordinary state to achieve, but our natural state that manifests when we stop obscuring it. Like the sun that always shines behind the clouds, our capacity for true vision is constantly present, simply veiled by our temporary agitations. We do not have to create clarity. We only have to stop troubling it. A Zen tale tells the story of a man who desperately searched everywhere in his house for his glasses, growing increasingly anxious at not finding them. He rummaged through drawers, looked under furniture, turned over the sofa cushions, his frustration growing with each minute. His wife watched him for a moment, then said gently that they were on his nose. This anecdote that makes us smile nonetheless describes our ordinary condition with remarkable precision. We search outside ourselves for the clarity that is already within us. We complicate what is simple. We lose what we have never stopped possessing. This recognition of our innate clarity transforms our approach to complex situations. Instead of losing ourselves in the detailed analysis of all the elements, we first learn to create the inner space necessary for understanding to emerge. This creation of space happens through a conscious release of our need to control everything and understand everything immediately. This release does not mean abandonment or passivity, but the adoption of a more receptive attitude that allows solutions to arise naturally. Like a patient hunter who waits for the right moment to act. Like a fisherman who knows that pulling on the line will not make the fish come faster. We learn to trust the intuitive intelligence that operates beyond the analytical mind. This intelligence does not work according to our schedules and demands. It has its own rhythm, often slower than our impatience would like, but also surer and deeper. This intuitive intelligence often manifests through those moments of sudden understanding where everything becomes clear at once. Those instants when the solution appears as obvious while we had stopped looking for it. These revelations cannot be forced, but they emerge naturally when we create favorable conditions. Mental calm, attentive presence, letting go of the need to control the process. How many times has the answer to a difficult question come to us in the shower, during a walk, upon waking, in those moments when we had stopped consciously thinking about it? The Taoist tradition teaches that this form of direct knowledge is more reliable than conceptual knowledge, because it emerges from our union with the situation rather than from our separation from it. When we analyze a problem, we place ourselves in front of it, like an object to examine. When we contemplate it, we enter into it, we inhabit it from within, and this intimacy reveals dimensions that external observation cannot reach. When we stop approaching problems as adversaries to defeat in order to welcome them as mysteries to explore, our perspective changes radically. What we took for complexity was often only complication created by our approach. Many situations become limpid as soon as we stop approaching them with our preconceptions and urgencies in order to meet them with open and patient curiosity. A master gardener was one day explaining to his apprentice before a sick plant that he could spend hours analyzing the problem, consulting manuals and trying different treatments. Or he could simply sit near it in silence and let his attention espouse it completely. Often, he said, the plant itself will tell you what it needs if you know how to listen. The apprentice was skeptical, but he tried. He sat near the plant, breathed deeply, and let his attention rest upon it without seeking to understand or resolve anything. After a while, he noticed that the soil seemed particularly compacted around the roots. He gently loosened the soil, and a few days later, the plant had regained its vigor. The diagnosis had come not from analysis, but from attentive presence. This deep listening applies to all domains where we seek clarity, whether in our relationships, our professional choices, our important decisions, or our existential questions. Situations have their own intelligence, their own internal logic that reveals itself to whoever knows how to listen with patience and respect. Our relationships speak to us if we know how to hear them. Our discomforts guide us if we stop fleeing from them. Our impasses teach us if we accept stopping at them. This listening requires a particular quality of inner silence. Not the silence of absence, but the silence full of total attention. This active silence creates a space where subtle signals can be perceived, where hidden connections can reveal themselves, where the deep order of situations can appear. It is not an empty silence, but a silence vibrant with presence, like that which reigns in a forest at dawn, full of attentive life. Cultivating this silence requires practice and patience, for our mind, accustomed to noise and agitation, at first resists this attentive stillness. It finds silence uncomfortable, almost threatening. It seeks to fill it, to furnish it, to flee from it. But gradually we discover that this silence does not impoverish us. It enriches us with a finer and truer form of perception. It becomes a friend, a refuge, a source of renewal. This refined perception transforms our relationship to the difficult emotions that often obscure our vision. Instead of enduring them as nuisances or fighting them as enemies, we learn to welcome them as messengers bearing precious information. Anger can reveal important boundaries that have been crossed, essential values that have been violated. Sadness can signal a necessary grieving process, a loss that asks to be honored. Anxiety can indicate a misalignment between our actions and our deep values, a direction that does not truly suit us. When we stop automatically rejecting these emotions in order to listen to them with compassion, they can become guides toward greater clarity about ourselves and our circumstances. They cease to be obstacles and become allies in our quest for understanding. This transformation of our relationship to difficult emotions is one of the most precious fruits of contemplative practice. This approach requires what Buddhists call equanimity, the capacity to remain centered and present even at the heart of inner storms. Equanimity is not indifference. It is not the cold detachment that no longer feels anything. It is rather that stability of heart that can welcome all emotions without being overwhelmed by any. That loving presence that remains available even when everything seems to be falling apart. A sage said that one who remains calm in the storm sees things that one who panics cannot perceive, and that clarity comes not from the absence of challenges, but from our capacity to remain centered at the heart of challenges. The experienced sailor does not pray for the sea to always be calm. He develops the capacity to navigate in all weather. Likewise, we do not seek a life without difficulties, which would be illusory, but the capacity to traverse difficulties with presence and discernment. This inner stability is acquired through the regular practice of the return to center that meditation, contemplation, or simply moments of conscious silence in our daily life allow. These practices are not luxuries reserved for those who have time to waste. They are necessities for anyone who wants to navigate the complexity of modern existence without getting lost. A few minutes of conscious presence each day can progressively transform our relationship to the world and to ourselves. This increased presence reveals that many of our confusions arise from our tendency to project the past and the future onto the present moment. We interpret current situations through the filter of our previous experiences, seeing repetitions where there may be entirely new situations. We complicate the present with our anxious anticipations, adding to real difficulties all those we imagine. This temporal projection makes us miss the simplicity and obviousness of what is now. The return to the present is not an escape into the instant, but a recognition that it is here and now that life actually unfolds and that clarity can manifest. It is in the present that decisions are made, that relationships are lived, that creations emerge. The past exists only in our memories. The future does not yet exist except in our projections. Only the present is real. Only the present is alive. Only the present is the place of our power to act and transform. A Zen fisherman was observing the water of the river and saw in it both its depth and its simplicity. The water does not try to be deep, he reflected. It is so naturally. It does not strive to flow toward the sea. It simply follows its slope. In the same way, clarity is not achieved through effort. It reveals itself through simplicity. This observation reminds us that clarity is not an accomplishment, but a revelation, not a construction, but a discovery. We do not manufacture clarity. We allow it to manifest by ceasing to prevent it. This understanding transforms our relationship to challenges and problems. Instead of approaching them as enemies to defeat by force, we learn to meet them as opportunities to develop our capacity for clear vision. Every confusion becomes an invitation to return to center, every difficulty an occasion to practice presence, every impasse a call to let go of our habitual strategies in order to let a new response emerge. When we stop resisting our difficulties in order to examine them with benevolent curiosity, we often discover that they carry within themselves the keys to their resolution. This discovery comes not from external analysis, but from the respectful intimacy we develop with our situations. By approaching our problems with gentleness rather than aggression, we create the conditions for them to reveal their nature and their possible solutions. This intimacy characterizes the Taoist approach to knowledge, knowing through union rather than separation, understanding through embracing rather than dissecting. This contemplative union reveals aspects of reality that remain inaccessible to the purely analytical approach. Analysis divides in order to understand. It separates elements to examine them one by one. This approach has its value, but it can also make us lose sight of the whole, the movement, the life that animates everything. Contemplation maintains unity while perceiving details. It sees the parts without losing the whole. This revelation does not diminish the importance of reason and analysis, but places them in a broader perspective, where they become tools in service of wisdom rather than ends in themselves. True clarity integrates intellectual precision and intuitive rightness in a unified vision that honors complexity without losing itself in complication. It knows how to use analysis when analysis is useful, and to set it aside when it becomes an obstacle. This integration requires what the masters call the art of balance, knowing when to analyze and when to let go, when to think and when simply to be present, when to act and when to wait. This art is not learned through fixed rules, but through developing a fine sensitivity to the needs of each moment. Every situation is unique. Every instant calls for a fresh response. And this freshness can only come from an attentive presence that does not blindly rely on the recipes of the past. This sensitivity transforms our relationship to time and patience Instead of wanting clarity immediately, we learn to trust the natural process of maturation that allows understandings to gradually deepen. Certain truths cannot be grasped all at once. They require time to infuse, to integrate, to reveal all their dimensions. This active patience is not resignation, but conscious participation in the natural rhythm of revelation. Fruit does not ripen faster because one pulls on it. A child does not learn to walk faster because one rushes them. Certain processes have their own temporality that our impatience cannot accelerate without damaging them. Learning to respect these rhythms, to accompany maturations rather than force them, is part of the art of clarity. This patience is not passive. It is a very subtle form of action that consists in creating and maintaining favorable conditions, while letting the process follow its course. This wisdom finally shows us that clarity is not a state we achieve once and for all, but a quality we cultivate continuously. Like a gardener who tends their garden with constancy, we learn to maintain the conditions favorable to the flourishing of our clear vision. The garden is never finished. It requires regular attention, a loving presence, patient work that renews itself with the seasons. Our inner clarity works in the same way. These conditions include the regularity of our contemplative practices, benevolent vigilance toward our tendencies to complicate, the cultivation of qualities like patience, humility, and compassion that nourish our capacity for true perception. This cultivation does not require heroic efforts, but constant and gentle attention to the movements of our inner experience. A few minutes of conscious presence each day are worth more than occasional hours of intense meditation. It is regularity that transforms, not intensity. Humility plays a particular role in this cultivation. It reminds us that our vision is always partial, that our certainties may be illusions, that reality always exceeds our conceptions of it. This humility is not a lack of confidence, but an openness, an availability to be surprised, to learn, to revise our understandings when experience invites us to. It guards us against the rigidity that is the enemy of clarity. Compassion also nourishes our clear vision. When we look at the world and ourselves with compassionate eyes, we see things that the critical gaze cannot perceive. Compassion softens our judgments, opens our heart, allows us to understand from within what cold analysis cannot grasp. It illuminates hidden motivations, wounds that disguise themselves as aggression, fears that wear the mask of arrogance. The art of clarity thus reveals itself as one of the most direct paths to wisdom and inner peace. It frees us from the tyranny of confusion by reconnecting us to our natural capacity for true vision. It transforms our relationships by revealing the simple beauty hidden behind relational complications. It enriches our work by allowing us to act from understanding rather than from agitation. It soothes our worries by showing us that most of our fears concern phantoms rather than realities. More deeply still, this recovered clarity reveals that we're not condemned to wander in confusion, but that we possess within ourselves all the resources necessary to navigate wisely through the complexity of existence. This revelation is profoundly liberating. It restores our power, our dignity as conscious beings capable of participating lucidly in the mystery of life. In this wise navigation lies perhaps the most precious teaching of the Taoist tradition. We are not separate from the wisdom we seek. We are not exiled from the clarity we desire. We are this very clarity, temporarily veiled by our agitations, but always present, always accessible, always ready to reveal itself. The muddy pond never ceased to be clear water. The sediment was only a passing veil. And when agitation ceases, when we create the silent space for manifestation, clarity appears of itself, naturally, as it always has, as it always will.